Welcome to the Knock Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbis Debunking the Missionaries. Rabbi Moshe Shulman is going to take care of this project tonight, and we're going to do more problems with the New Testament. Rabbi, thank you for joining us here. Looking forward to it as usual, for sure. Yes, sir. Very good. Every week seems like it's months away, but it's okay. All right, so, and for some reason the actual screen is actually frozen. I don't know what that is, but we will see what happens here. All right, let me see if I can change the scene and see if that fixes it.
See you? Okay, this is fine. I just said hello so everybody sees I'm here.
Okay, cool. Well, you're live and moving. I'm not, so you guys don't be distilled by that. Rabbi, you can continue on, and we will.
Anyways,
we'll move right on.
Let's just talk a minute, hear what's going on here.
Yes, sir.
First of all, by the way, we're supposed to be getting a hurricane through here. Supposed to be heavy rain in probably about a half hour or so.
Oh, wow.
So if something happens and I lose electricity and you lose connection, that's what's happening.
That makes sense. Very good.
Okay. Just so you should know.
Yes, sir. All right. We'll take it away. It's all yours.
Okay. Now, this hopefully will be the last one on this section dealing with New Testament as history. Of course, the most important issue as far as historical is concerned, I mean, we went into the virgin birth very much, and the differences between Luke and Matthew. The most important thing, of course, is going to be the resurrection, which we are going to do. But I just want to take a little break in between. Next week, I think we're going to do questions and answers.
Okay.
I also want to go through Isaiah 53, just the biblical part of it, not the whole thing. I'll leave some of the other parts for when we actually go through Dr. Brown's books on the subject. But I do want to go to the biblical thing because the biblical understanding of the text, which will take probably a few months to go through.
Right.
The way I do things, I schlep a lot, but what can I do?
Schlepper, you're a hard worker.
When it comes to these things, I assume that the people know absolutely nothing, and
right.
So I go through a lot of things. And truth of the matter is, I find that it's not that I don't know absolutely nothing, but it's like sometimes you have to unlearn things that you were incorrectly taught
sure.
to really understand what the truth is. So that's why it takes sometimes a lot of time. Okay, so that, and then, also with the holidays coming up, I think I want to take questions. So exactly how I'm going to work it out, if I wait until after the holidays and start with Isaiah 53 and just take questions beforehand or what, it depends. The material's there just because of the holidays. I make my notes beforehand, and I haven't completed all my notes that I want to use for the unit on Isaiah 53.
Okay.
I have like rough information available right now for me. But, it'll be fun.
Sure.
Okay, so now we're going to finish up with everything except the resurrection, those little bits and pieces that I've left out that are sort of off to the side, but just indicate to you there's a problem with the text. Now, remember when we were talking about the virgin birth, we dealt with Luke, and we discussed a couple of things that Luke has wrong, indicating that he doesn't know his subject very well. We talked about two things. One, as far as John the Baptist's father, who was a priest in the temple, where Luke confuses between what John's father was, which was a regular priest, and giving one of the daily incense offerings, which he was honored to be able to do. It was a very big honor to they used to made a lottery for it, a very big honor to be able to do it to the incense offerings. It was such a big honor that the Mishnah brings us that you're only allowed to do it once in your lifetime, so that other priests actually can do that. And the once in a year that the high priest would do. So we saw them convinced. And then, of course, when Mary has a baby, he confuses between redemption of the firstborn, which every non-Levite has to do, because the Levites are there in place of the firstborn, so there's redemption, and the sacrifice that the woman gives at the birth of a child, in this case it was a boy, which are unrelated one to another. And in fact, the sacrifice only can be in Jerusalem. She has to go to Jerusalem for it, whereas the redemption of the firstborn is any place. So we see already that there's a problem with Luke, who's considered by the Christians the most accurate historically. We said that there's problems with his actual knowledge of the subjects he's writing about. I mean, general things, John the Baptist, there's certain things that we know historically. Herod, we know he lived historically. But if we're talking about real history about things, we see that there's problems with it. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of instances there, and then some general things. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is a very interesting story that occurs. And we're going to look in different places. It appears in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So let's look at Mark because Mark is the earliest one, and then we can look at it later on. We're looking at Mark chapter 2, verse 23 through 28. And let's look at this. Okay, let me read it to you. One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as he made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God where Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and he gave some to his companions. Then he said to him, the Sabbath was made for mankind, and not humankind for Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even the Sabbath." Okay. That's a little bit of misunderstanding what it means, but essentially that. Okay, so this is a very famous story. I'm not going to go into all the errors about which priest it was. I'll leave this to other people. So what's the story that Mark is telling us? Jesus and his disciples are taking a walk out in the fields. Okay? And they're hungry. They're famished, they're hungry. According to this, the story is that they, to be in a position, must have been they haven't eaten for days and days and days. I don't know. But, to just take a walk outside of the city, they've been in the city to go outside and just stop hungry, that his argument doesn't make sense. But that's besides the point. Let's just deal with the argument itself. Outside the city, taking a walk in the fields. And they're hungry and they pick grain from there. And the Pharisees are there on Shabbos. On Shabbos, the Pharisees have nothing better to do in the daytime but to take a walk out into the fields. Okay? Just to find Jesus there. That's the story that Mark says. Let's see how Matthew takes the same story. That's in Matthew 12, 1 through 5. And here's what he says. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what's not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, ate the bread of their presence, which it was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and I sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Okay, this is a little bit weirder, what he says here. By the way, this is a more interesting argument that he says. So let me tell you what he's talking about here. First of all, he says about David, they were hungry and he was given bread to eat that was not supposed to be given to him, according to this. The second argument he brings here is on the Sabbath day that the priests violate the Sabbath. How do they violate the Sabbath? Because they slaughter animals on the Sabbath. This is Sabbath offering Sabbath. So you're not allowed to slaughter on the Sabbath. However, in the temple you are allowed to slaughter. Now, what's interesting here, and as far as we're going to deal with this later on because we want to deal with the oral law, the oral tradition, Jesus does not say that there's nothing wrong with that picking on the Sabbath is allowed. He is acknowledging, in fact, that what we know only from rabbinic law, that you're not allowed to, that picking grain is, for example, one of those things you're not allowed to do. He doesn't deny that that's a fact. Okay, so he agrees that there's something that's not written in the Torah, it's explicitly, but says Shabbos is not supposed to work, that it means this. Okay, so there's no argument about that. In fact, there are things forbidden on the Sabbath. His first argument is that that since it's something we call pekach nefesh, that they're about to die, that they need it. And number two is that we see that there are in certain situations, in fact, you're about to violate the Sabbath in the temple. And so since this is what he's doing is more higher than the temple service, it becomes under that. See, notice how Matthew adds to it something else, a principle that is true in the temple, that they do things. The difference, of course, is that it's explicitly in the Torah that they're supposed to do. Okay? in the book of Numbers, in the parsha we call Parshat Pinchas, it talks about the daily services that have to be done. And those daily services are done because the Bible says to do. But you're not allowed to give, for example, if you want to give a voluntary offering, there's something called an ola or a mincha that you wouldn't be able to give on Shabbos. There's things you aren't allowed to give on Shabbos, but the required things are given, of course, because it's required on Shabbos. So his argument, of course, here, from pure argumentative point of view, we're going to see certainly the second argument has no foundation because it's only because the Torah says it specifically that he's allowed to do it. And by the way, this thing that the man is the Lord of the Shabbos, and the Talmud talks about it also, and it's talking about basically in a situation where rescuing life on Shabbos. Okay, let's go to Luke. Chapter 6, 1 through 6. He also discusses the same subject. And here it is. One Sabbath while Jesus was going to the grain fields, his disciples plucked some heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and his companions were hungry. He entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the peasants, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and gave some to his companions. Then he said, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Okay? His is a little bit closer to Mark. It doesn't have the extradition added story that, of course, appears in Matthew. And as we know, most scholars, even Christians, agree that Mark is the basis, and Luke and Matthew get from that, and each one adds slightly to its story. But this is basically the same. So, let's now analyze the story for a second. What's going on here? Okay, let's deal with it. Something everybody agrees to. Jesus is in the fields, grain fields. And the Pharisees, for some reason, are there also. And they see them and tell them that you're not supposed to do that. Okay. That's the story that they're selling you. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn for you also. There are numerous problems with this. First of all, the Sabbath day, as is well known, is a day that doesn't have any time for you to do such things. There's prayers, and there is a meal, and after the meal there is learning, there's teaching that goes on Sabbath. The Sabbath day was a big day of teaching to those people who worked the whole week. People didn't go out to their fields on Shabbos to see what's going on there. And certain as Pharisee rabbis are going out to fields. That doesn't make sense at all. The story sounds like something made up in order to create a polemic against the Pharisees. Okay? So first of all, one more thing. Pharisees wouldn't have been there. Doesn't make sense. Absolutely makes no sense. Number two, there's even a greater problem. How did the students, how did they end up in the grain fields to begin with? Grain fields are outside the city. Now there's two possibilities. Actually, there's three possibilities. One, the grain fields are within what we call Tchim Shabbos, the distance which one is able to walk on the Sabbath day. Now it's very well known that the Jews are not allowed to travel to a certain distance. In fact, I found a very interesting passage here in Josephus, in the Antiquities, Book 13, Chapter 8, Paragraph 4. Very interesting. This is talking about when they were going out to war. And here's what it says here, very interesting enough. It was a desire of Hyrcanus the Jew, because it was such a festival. This is talking about a festival, not on Shabbos itself, but a festival. We'll see the laws the same. Derived from their forefathers, whereupon the law of the Jews do not allow them to travel. It's very well known that Jews are not allowed to travel. Josephus talks about it. It's a given. They didn't have to argue with them. Everybody knew that's not allowed. I'm going to read a little bit further here because it's a very interesting point here that I want to bring up. And truly he did not speak falsely in saying so, for the festival which is called Pentecost, that's Shavuot, did then fall out on the next day to the Sabbath, the day after Sabbath. It happened to fall out that year. Now, there's something interesting here because this argument comes up a lot of time with people who are Karaites or that. In this, Josephus says, it just happened that year it came out. It's not that it comes out all this time, the day after the Sabbath. Actually, nor is it allowed was either on the Sabbath or on the festival day. So either Sabbath or festival is not allowed to travel. So Hyrcanus is talking about how, hey, listen, we're not allowed to travel on these days, so we can't travel. He was talking about his army. The army was actually had to rest on that day because they're not allowed to travel. There's a distance they're allowed to travel, they're not allowed to travel. But a second very important thing is that the same thing applies to festivals. Where in the Torah it's not specific, but we know that is because it's a festival is also like a Shabbos. And the third thing that I want to say is that he says, then did fall out to be the next day to the Sabbath. It ended up at that particular year that Shavuot came out the day after Shabbos, because it didn't always come out, but it happened at the So because it's saying here they had to rest 2 days, it just happened that year that it came out. Okay, that actually answers many times you see the point of view stated by Karaites that the counting of the Omer has to be the day after Shabbos, so it always comes out on Sunday. Josephus says that's actually not the case. It just happened to have come out on Sunday that year, but it doesn't always. Okay, just want to point out. But again, the main issue that we're talking about here, the main thing we're talking about here is that you're not allowed to travel. So how is it they got into the field? And how is it the Pharisees came to see them? The story, and Yiddish say it's missing hand and feet. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Where could Jesus be coming from at that? And being hungry, where did he come? If he came from the city, what do you mean, just talk a walk out that hurry? Just talk a walk out to the fields to a certain distance that they're allowed to go, which is really 2,000 amos, about a mile. Okay, walked at most a mile in. You couldn't wait another. You walked a mile after or so. You maybe walked around. You can't walk another mile back in. You're going to die like that. It's the whole discussion here has nothing. The purpose of discussion, of course, is to say that man is the Lord of Shabbos, attacking the concept of Shabbos and Shabbos restrictions, which isn't really true in the story, because the story acknowledges, in fact, that it's not allowed to pick grain. It's just because of a dangers of life that you're doing, but normally you wouldn't be able to do it. So the story even doesn't agree with that principle. It agrees that men are restricted on Shabbos, contrary to what many people think. Not that Shabbos is nullified. So in this particular case, because a person needs it, because of health reasons, whatever. But the whole story has no foundation. Jesus wouldn't have been there if he'd actually left in the city to go out there. It wouldn't be possible that any of his people there would get to the position that would they be so hungry that they have to eat, otherwise where to die. None of this works, and even more, the Pharisees wouldn't have traveled out there. The Pharisees wouldn't go out to the fields. All of this stuff makes no sense. The only thing is, as I have seen people do it, and make this point, this story is made up for one purpose. It's made up for a polemic and nothing else. The polemic is in order to attack the Pharisees in a way, and to say that, listen, man isn't called Shabbos, Shabbos called man. Okay? By the way, the second argument in Matthew actually makes that point right. It's just irrelevant because it's talking about the Torah, but if you look at the what it says in Matthew, that he adds a second of it in the temple, the priests did think to a violation of Shabbos. The answer being that there's no comparison, because the Torah says specifically they're supposed to do this. And they only do specifically what the Torah says they're supposed to do on Shabbos, other things they wouldn't do. But that argument would be an argument to say, okay, we can be nullifying the Shabbos for whatever reason we want. Okay? But in Mark and Luke, that doesn't appear. Mark and Luke just appears that they're out in the fields, which is totally insane, totally not normal, acceptable, that somebody would be actually traveling on Shabbos there. Why would he be outside in the fields? Where would it happen? Okay. He wouldn't, and if he'd been outside the Shabbos, he wouldn't be able to travel that far anyways. They'd have to stay in the place. And we acknowledge that the traveling is not allowed, to the point that even Jewish armies did not travel on the Shabbos. It was accepted and understood at that time. So that's one story that we have in another story, because after I mentioned two things from Luke. Another story that we see in the New Testament, which doesn't seem to fit anything that we can understand. It just, it's a story it's a principle looking for a story to make that principle. But the story is not believable. Now there's another one that's very interesting. This is also a very, very famous story, and it's of course the same kind of a problem. Okay, let's start in Mark 3, 1 through 6. Mark 3, 1 through 6, and let me read it to you. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, come forth. Then he said to him, is it lawful to do good or do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill? But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of heart and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Let me ask you a question. What is the story trying to say? The story is trying to say is that healing is not allowed on Shabbos. Healing is not allowed on Shabbos. Okay? Or maybe it's trying to say rather than that they don't like the fact that there's miracles. But either one of those things are very strange. We know in the Talmud many stories of miracle healers in the time of Choni Amago, who lived, I believe, before him. So we know that there were many, miracle healers at the time that made it not unusual. Now let's look at Matthew's view of this. Matthew tells a story in chapter 12, 1 through 5. Twelve 1 through 5. At that time, wrong place. 12:10 through 13. Excuse me. 9 through 13. Excuse me. And he left that place and entered the synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" And the answer is yes, it is. So that they might accuse him. He said to them, "Suppose one of you has only one sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." A very interesting argument, except healing is allowed. And if an animal falls into a place, unless it's about to die or something like that, you can leave it there. Then he said to the man, stretch. In fact, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in one of the documents, I think Damascus documents, which talks about the laws of Sabbath, it says specifically you're not allowed to take it out there. So this is a question which doesn't show any knowledge of what's going on. Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored. It sounds other. But the Pharisees conspired against him how to destroy him. Again, there's nothing wrong that Jesus did there. Healing a person with your words, saying a prayer and healing something, is not a violation of the Sabbath. There's no violation whatsoever. I mean, there are certain types of healings that aren't allowed, making an operation unless it's much an emergency, a person would die otherwise or something like that. This guy's not going to die. He could have waited until Sunday as far as, the emergent types of situations which allow you to violate Shabbos would not be relevant to this person. He could have done it on Sunday. But Stam, just to tell someone, hey, your hand is healed, there's no prohibition on Shabbos. I challenge anybody to find a place which says that on the Sabbath that you're not allowed to say a prayer over somebody to heal them. No place that says that whatsoever. All this argument has no basis and foundation. What it is essentially another argument to try and attack Judaism of its time, which was Pharisaic Judaism. Okay? Now, again, let's go. Luke has this in chapter 6. Verses 7 through 9. Again, let's see what it says. 6 through 9, actually, we can go to 6. On the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might an accusation come. What kind of accusation would happen about? There's nothing wrong with that. They're going to cure themselves. Even though he knew that what they were thinking, he said to the man who with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." And he got him and then Jesus said, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath to save life or destroy it?" First, if it's not saving a life, it's just, whatever. After looking around all of them, he said to them, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was up. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Again, the implication here is, and the saying here is that their anger with him was because he was doing something violating the Sabbath. But it's no violation. There's absolutely no violation of Shabbos to do that. In fact, if he really had such a power to do it on Shabbos, it would be no different than doing any other day. There's just now, interestingly enough, John has actually three stories of this type. So what I'd like to do is go to each one of them. In chapter 5 in John, verse 5 through 10. Okay. One man was there. It's talking about being a gate. It's not a synagogue's gate, so it's a little bit different, but healing stories also on the Sabbath. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. And Jesus saw him lying there. This was on a festival. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man said, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." He said, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took his mat and began to walk. Now that day being was a Sabbath. He says it was a holiday in Sabbath, I don't know why. But doesn't make. So Jesus said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath, it's not lawful for you to carry your mat." Actually, that's not true. If it's in a city, he's allowed to carry it. But so the man who made me walk, said to me, "Take up your mat and walk." Who is the man that, and so it's Jesus. Fine. So this was Jesus. Again, here's a healing. Again, the Pharisees against who said something. In this case, it's a case of him carrying. Now, it's in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a walled city. In a walled city, they're allowed to carry. So there's no violation, nothing here. John apparently is ignorant of Judaism and what they do at the time. But again, what did Jesus do? There was nothing wrong here. What's the purpose here? To try and show that, in fact, Jewish law, Sabbath is nothing. Okay? Now, 7:23. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 23. Okay, so here's a reference also to, here's another argument he's giving, similar to Matthew gives different. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses might not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Now, the problem, here, again, is like Matthew, he has an extra story. Apparently it's a reference to a healing on Shabbos, where he healed by saying words, which of course is not forbidden. But circumcision on Shabbos is very interesting, because the Torah says specifically you're supposed to circumcise on the 8th day. It doesn't say if it's not Shabbos, you have to make another day. If it's Shabbos, you have to do another day. It says you circumcise on the 8th day. If the Torah says specifically to do something, you do it. Now, there are certain types of restrictions about circumcision on Shabbos that come about, but essentially circumcision itself is allowed on Shabbos. So what's the question here? There's nothing wrong. There's nothing. Where's the beef? There's no beef here. There's nothing wrong here. What is he talking about? He's obviously not talking to Jewish people. He's talking to Gentiles. Gentiles who do not know that, hey, there's nothing wrong here. Against Judaism to say something but which has no foundation in Judaism. Now the last one in John is in chapter 9, 1 through 17. This is an interesting one. As he walked, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had this, he spat on the ground and made mud with his saliva and spread the mud in man's eyes, saying to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means send. I don't think so. Then he went and washed and came back to see. Neighbors and the man who used to sit and beg. Now, on verse 13, they brought him to Pharisee, the man who had been before him. Now it was Sabbath day when Jesus made mud and opened his eyes. Now, that's very interesting because in verse, I didn't notice this now, just reading it again. Supposedly it was made on Shabbos, and he made it with clay, which would, of course, have been a problem to make with clay. But if you look at verse 4, we must work the works of him who sent me. While it is day, night is coming when no one can work. So Jesus says he's doing it by day, so why is he being accused? This is very confusing itself. Okay, let's get this one to a side because it's too confusing, and I don't want to get into the issue of internal contradictions here. But if you look at verse 4 and compare it to what is said later on, in verse 14, they seem to contradict each other. But the point here again is these stories are brought about to indicate an attack on Judaism and the Sabbath day with things that are not really violations of Shabbos to begin with. So these are things brought about by people who don't really know what the law is, and in order to cause a problem. Now the next one I want to do is going to be fun because probably you never even knew about this. This has to do with the resurrection. We haven't really got into the resurrection contradictions there, so I don't want to do so much the contradictions. But let's look at Mark 16, verse 1. Mark 16, verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. Now the question is, why did they wait to the first day? Why did they wait until Sunday? There's arguments when we get to discuss about resurrection, we talk about when exactly Jesus was executed. Was it Friday afternoon? Was it Thursday afternoon? Was it Passover? When exactly was it Passover? When exactly was it? That's one of the big questions about the resurrection. But let's just look at it simply. Let's say that the resurrection was a Friday night. Why did they wait till Sunday? The usual answer is because you're not allowed to anoint on the Shabbos. Well, let's look at some of the other locations where it says. Matthew, chapter 12, verse 10 to 13. Matthew, chapter 12, 10 to 13. Oops, I'm looking in the wrong place. I am sorry. Let me do Luke instead. I went back to what I was doing before. Luke 24:1. I want to look at because Matthew is a different story here. 24:1. I'm sorry about that. 24:1. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away. Again, they took the price of the spices they prepared. Apparently, because they were on the impression they were not allowed to do it. Okay, let me go back here because I missed out. The last chapter, 23, says, Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath day, they rested according to the commandment. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb. So Luke here, we see clearly that it's because of the Sabbath day they rested. And it looks like I made a little mistake. So let me back to Mark just to see if it also has that same thing. No, it doesn't. So Luke talks about this, the reason why they did it is because the spices because the Sabbath they interrupted between they prepare the spices and they have to go after Shabbos in order to do it. Okay. Matthew 28:1 is the same story. Okay, here we just see that they went there. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. Okay, it doesn't say the reason why. And if you look at John, it's basically similar to the same thing. End of chapter 19, beginning of 20. So here, after some say it was a secret to do, asked Pilate to give him the body of Jesus. It came to Nicodemus, who had at the first come to Jesus by night, asked him to bring a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. He took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in the linen spice, according to the burial custom of Jews. Okay, so according to them, it was before the burial that it was done. Now the question here is, when we're dealing with Luke and Mark specifically, Matthew possibly the same thing. John is definitely different. The implication here is that one is not allowed to bring spices. The problem is that's not true. We're not going to put spices or anointing the body. That is not even true. In the Mishnah, chapter 23, halacha 4. That's what it says. On Shabbos you can do everything for a body that you need to do. You can anoint it with oil or wash it off. As long as you don't move the body itself. So you're allowed to take the body, you're allowed to put anointing oils around the body. And it talks about other things similar to that. So in fact, there was no prohibition for the women to have come on Shabbos. Contrary to what we've seen in Luke, there's no prohibition for women to have gone on Shabbos. They didn't have to rest on Shabbos. They could have brought that stuff beforehand. Was not necessary. Okay? Again, another instance where we see in the New Testament where they make a big deal about certain things. This one's a little bit less than some things about Shabbos. But again, they make things about, and of course Luke is the one who doesn't know what's going on. And it's just nothing, no foundation whatsoever. Okay, now we want to move into other things. In the New Testament, there's misrepresentations about two things. One is the Pharisees, what kind of people they were, and the other one is Pilate, Pontius Pilate. So I'm going to try and go through a little bit of each one because there is a lot of material on this. What I'd like to do is let's look at Matthew chapter 23, because that's the real main point. Luke at chapter 11 does the same thing, but time constraints will probably affect that. One place is good enough. So let's go into Matthew chapter 23. This is what he says. Okay. The scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Fine. They have to do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. Okay? They're hypocrites. They don't practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others. They're very difficult what they do. Their decisions of what to do are extremely strict and overbearing on people. But they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move others, but they don't help. They're really not very good. Number 5, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. Okay? By the way, this is again another thing showing from Torah Shabbat Peh, because phylacteries, we know what that's tefillin, and fringes are tzitzis on the body that they wear. Jesus doesn't say that what they're doing is wrong. What they're doing is doing ostentatious. They love to have a place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplace, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. That continues on and on and on. Okay, let me go to verse 16, 17, 23. Let's go to 23. There's much more in here that I can do, but I just want to I see how the time goes, and I really do want to finish this stuff up right now. So 23, it says, Lord God, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weighty matters of law, justice, mercy, and faith. Okay, first of all, let's deal with it on a simple level before we go into the factual situation, because the Pharisees are talking about in Josephus. Number one, you don't tithe mint or dill with these kinds of things. There's no money tithe for that kind of thing whatsoever. And the weightier matters of the law, what makes something weighty or less? God says, this is what my will is, you should do this. It's not weighty or not. The weight of it is who commands it, not what the commandment is or what we think about it is. Yes, there's no contradiction. You can do both. Have justice, mercy, and faith also. But if God tells you to do something, you do it all. It's on this. It's not there's one other. They're all on the same level. God wants you to do something. That's it. You do it because God wants you to, not because, oh, this one's more. There's no place in the Torah which says something is more valuable than another. Okay, so let's go through some of the other things here that were in verse 7. Very interesting. They greet with respect and tell people call them rabbi. Wouldn't call them rabbi. Hillel was not called a rabbi. Shammai was not called a rabbi. The use of the word rabbi is actually post-Jesus. Not very long post-Jesus as a title, but it's definitely post-Jesus. To call Jesus a rabbi at the time that he lived is anachronistic. Hillel was not called a rabbi. Shammai was not called a rabbi. Okay, the title of rabbi comes in later. And in fact, Hillel's descendant Shimon ben Gamliel, and Gamliel, his father, who's the one who in the Testament, were not called rabbi. They were just called Gamliel, and was just called Shimon ben Gamliel. They were not called that. But putting that aside, let's look at, besides the fact that there's incorrect information here, information that would reflect a later date or something that was not known. It's very important to look at, well, what does Josephus say? Josephus talks about the Pharisees in a number of places. Okay? Now the impression you get is that the Pharisees were very strict type of people. Strict type of people, that they gave very great burdens on everybody, just felt so burdened by it, whatever. But let's look at book 13, chapter 10, and see what it says here. Okay, so it says here in Josephus, talking about, this is a story with how Hyrcanus becomes a Sadducee. So it says, indeed the Pharisees, even upon other occasions, are not apt to be spared in punishments. Rather than being very strict, they were actually very lenient as far as things are concerned. And let's do a little bit more. In chapter 18, we find a much more advanced, extensive discussion about them. Now, remember what's being said about the Pharisees by the people who like honor showing off the demand respect, basically, that kind of a person. Now, here's what Josephus says about Pharisees. Now, for the Pharisees, they live meanly. Meanly doesn't mean that they're mean. Meanly means that they live very sparsely, a Spartan diet, and despise delicacies in diet, and they follow the conduct of reason, and what that prescribes to them as good for them, they do. And they think they ought earnestly to strive to observe reason's dictates in practice. So it's not that they don't practice what they preach. They practice what they preach. They also pay respect to such as are in years, nor are they so bold as to contradict them in anything which they have introduced. So there's no respect for their elders. And when they determine that all things are done by fate, they do not take away the freedom from men of acting as they think fit. Since the notion is that it hath pleased God to make a temper whereby what he wills is done, but so that the will of the man can act virtuously or viciously. Interesting. This is basically a summation of something he says in Perikopos. They also believe that souls have an immortal vigor in them, and that under the earth there will be rewards or punishments, according as they have lived virtuously or viciously in this life. And the latter are to be detained in an everlasting prison, but the former are to have power to revive and live again. On account of which doctrines they are able greatly to persuade the body of the people, and whatsoever they do about divine worship, prayers, and sacrifice, they perform them according to their direction, insomuch that the cities give great attestation to them on account of their entire virtuous conduct, both in the actions of their lives and their discourses also. Exactly the opposite kind of an idea that you see from what it says in Matthew 23. These are people of utmost virtue, respected by everybody, because they practice what they preach, and they live in honorable and humble ways. Okay. That's one of them. Okay, we have some time for the next one, and this will be the last one I want to do tonight. And that's Pontius Pilate, or Saint Pontius Pilate, according to the, I think, Ethiopian Church, among others, who have sainted this man. If we read the Testament, we will get to this when I do the resurrection, but if we read the Testament, we see that each of the books are a little bit different, but the thread that goes through it is basically Pontius Pilate is a pushover. He's not such a bad guy. Okay? He really doesn't want to do it. He's really a nice guy, and there's really, there's nothing to complain about. He's cool. He's a nice guy. However, what's the fact of the matter? We actually have two sources in ancient history from this. Okay? We have Philo, and we have Josephus. Now, Josephus mentions him in his Antiquities and the Jewish War, but since Josephus is later, let's do the early one, Philo. Philo was a very important personality because of religiosity. His brother was the head of the Jewish community in Alexandria, and he was a philosopher, a very well-learned man, and he wrote a number of things. And one of the things he wrote was his embassy to Gaius. Gaius is actually Caligula. Gaius Julius Caesar was his name. But he's known to us as Caligula in history because basically he was a bit of a nutcase. If you want to read about how crazy some of the Roman emperors were, you should read about Caligula. Anyways, he was sent to Caligula because of decrees against the Jewish people. And in his letter, he talks about Pontius Pilate. Okay, so let's look at this here. This is Philo writing, actually, about his going to Caligula. Let's see what he writes about him.
I have a great question for you before you disconnect tonight. That's in chat. I've been working with a few people in chat, and so before you leave, I definitely want you to comment for a person who's identified as Apostle Paul. So after you finish your detail.
Okay. Then I will try and go a little quickly. Woo-hoo.
Thank you, Rabbi. All right, here we go.
Okay, he's talking here about Pilate. In paragraph 299, he's talking about Pilate was one of the emperor's lieutenants, having been appointed governor of Judea. And he talks about all kinds of things he did. And so among the things he talks about, but when he steadfastly refused his petition to not set up an idol, for he was a man of very inflexible disposition, very merciless, as well as very obstinate. Does Pilate appear to be somebody who's obstinate and merciless in the New Testament? No, exact opposite. And they cried, do not cause a sedition, do not make war upon us, do not destroy the peace which exists. The honor of the emperor is not identical with dishonor to the ancient laws. Let it not be to your pretense for heaping insult on our nation. Tiberius is not desirous that any of our laws or customs should be destroyed. And if you yourself say that he is, show us either some command from him, or some letter, or something of the kind, that we who have been sent to you as ambassadors may cease to trouble you and may address our supplications. It goes on and on about Pilate, about all the bad things that he did. And what was the result? This is Caligula. Caligula was actually the adopted son of Tiberius, who took over afterwards. So after, immediately without putting anything off to the next day, he wrote a letter reproaching and reviling him in the most bitter manner for his act of unprecedented audacity and wickedness, commanding him immediately to take down the shields and to convey them away from the metropolis of Judea and Caesarea, on Caesarea Augusta, after his grandfather Augustus. Excuse me, this is Tiberius who wrote that. Okay, so we see that Pilate, who was governor under Tiberius Caesar, was rebuked because of his obstinacy, of his mercilessness, and of his actions toward the Jewish people. So how does that fit with the Pilate that we see in the New Testament? Doesn't fit at all. Now, let me just give one more instance.
That's fine.
In book 18, chapter 3, there's a few instances here. We'll just do a couple of them included here. Chapter 3. But now Pilate, the procurator of Judea, removed the army from Syria to Jerusalem to take their winter quarters there in order to abolish the Jewish laws. Now it was winter. Now remember, around Passover time, there was a valid reason to have the soldiers in Jerusalem because it was a time where it was known there was lots of people, there could be problems. So it was pretty well known. But in the winter, in the middle of winter, it's not. So we introduced Caesar's effigies. This means ensigns. This is what was being talked about by Philo there, which were upon the ensigns, and brought them to the city, whereas our law forbids us to very making of images. And it goes on and on and on about Pilate, how very nice he was, how he steals money and stuff like that. So we see what kind of a person he is. The end result, of course, was that he got called to Rome. I'm going to leave it here now, because I don't want to. There are a few other citations we can get from Josephus on the same subject, but I want to end the discussion about what kind of person Pilate really was by what Luke says in chapter 13:1. What's Luke say in 13:1? At that very time there was some present who told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with the sacrifices. Mingled their blood with the sacrifices. Okay? Pilate was known for being a bloodthirsty tyrant, a person who had no respect for the Jewish people in the area, and did things. That's what. But if you read through, and we're going to go through the resurrection in detail later on, if you read through it with Pilate, his place, he washes his hands from it. He doesn't know. All this stuff does not fit the Pilate that we know from history. And even the little reference in Luke, indicates that Pilate was in fact not that type of person. He was a bloodthirsty person, as we've seen from both Philo and Josephus. Okay, I think I'll leave it at the end here. I did a little bit short on that last part because
That's
it will
fine.
come up again when we do the resurrection, so it's not
Okay,
really bad.
so Rabbi,
You had one question here.
I have a very specific request I'm asking you for now. So, the Apostle Paul in chat is actually he's new to the channel, so give him that credit. He's asking, how was it that Jesus actually violated any Old Testament laws? We've covered this numerous times, not just on your show, but also with Rabbi Tovia Singer,
Well,
Rabbi
the
Michael
easiest one
Skobac.
is he showed disrespect for his parents.
Okay, so take it away. Spend as much time as you want.
Example,
If we have to go over, you can take as much time as you want. Just go with the whole Jesus.
No, I'm going to keep it in. I'm going to keep it very short because there's a whole thing that we did before about unkosher Jesus. So I would
yes, very nice.
With Apostle Paul, there is a whole series of lectures I've called Unkosher Jesus. If you have trouble finding a Tanakh talk, I have a channel now for myself, Moshe Shulman. So I have them all together in a playlist, so you could always download or listen to them all one after another. It's called Unkosher Jesus, in which I go through actually about Jesus, what he was.
Right.
But the most important, there are two instances where I know in John, where by the wedding, where Jesus' mother comes to him and informs him that they're running out of water. And he speaks to his mother in a very disrespectful manner.
Oh, yes. Good one.
And then the other case, which is, of course, in Luke, where after coming back from Jesus at that time was like 12, 13 years old, whatever, after they were in Jerusalem for Passover, and they go back, and for 3 days his parents didn't know where it was. And when they asked, he answered them in such a chutzpah way, saying, why you ask me such a stupid question? You're not my parents? And please listen to Unkosher Jesus, because I do compare it to the way the Torah requires us to live and how actually our rabbis actually teach us how we're supposed to be as far as respect to parents. No child would ever speak to their parent that way, because that is totally contrary to what God wants us to do. Our respect for our parents is extremely important. Okay, so there's much more stuff there.
There actually is a lot more, and you did cover more in previous shows. And also, once again, I mentioned Rabbi Tovia Singer actually mentioned some, and even Rabbi Skobac actually covered a whole handful during the old New Testament cross-referencing. So if you guys want to know more, that's definitely a good place to look for sure. Yeah,
definitely. Either you can look at the Tanakh Talk, you can find them there, or if you want to find, a little plug for my new YouTube channel. Yeah. I do have a channel called Moshe Shulman, and on there I have put into a playlist the Unkosher Jesus, so you can actually see them in the order and actually listen to them. Very cool. So either way you go, you'll be able to find it. But yes, that's a very good answer.
Very awesome. Okay, so big shout out once again to Andrea Weinberg. You're awesome. Thank you for your moderation on the YouTube chat. I really appreciate all you've done. You're on top of everything. So if you have any questions, if you can't get my attention, tag Andrea. She'll take care of you for sure. And so, man, I wish I could actually respond to all these comments. There was a lot of good stuff going on tonight. So we're kind of overdue though. So next week, same time, same place, Hashem willing, Rabbi Moshe Shulman will be here again to actually teach you more that you need to know. Do you have a scope for next week's topic, Rabbi?
Well, next week I think I'm going to take questions. I'm going to get to Isaiah 52, but I don't know if I want to start that before the holidays or not. Good. So next week I think just get all your questions. We'll take questions both from the chat, and you can actually talk to me in person if you want. You can call in.
Absolutely.
That I think we're going to definitely do next week.
In fact,
I might even do the week after that also, because it's getting before the Jewish holidays and it becomes very, very difficult for me to make the proper preparations for what I do. So
okay, so I just put the phone number in chat. If you guys want to write the number down before we close the show out, write it down. If you want to tune in next week, you can actually call in during the show and actually talk directly to Rabbi. You can exchange conversations. You can ask your questions. He can keep you on the phone.
And if you can, William.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to put my email address, outreach@judaismsanswer.com?
Oh, yes.
If you send me questions you want me to address, I will actually address them next week.
I thought I had your information on the screen. Apparently not. Okay, so I'm gonna put it in the chat right now. I need to actually do that. So outreach. No, sorry. Yeah. What was it? Questions at outreach?
Outreach@judaismsanswer.com.
Okay, was it questions at?
Any question? No, just my regular email. Outreach@judaismsanswer.com.
Okay, got it. Okay, so it's Judaism. Sorry, guys. I'm a bad typer. Okay. .com. Okay, there you go.
It's supposed to have very heavy rain here right now.
Oh, good Lord. Well, you should be safe.
Well, there's a hurricane going by.
Right. Okay, so right there. Oh, I missed an R. So let me try that again. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Copy. I don't like retyping stuff. I'm just a bad typer. My wife can type 102 words a minute. I type like 2 words a minute, just to let you know. Control V.
Oh, Nelson Alvarez asked about the Chinese Communist Party. No.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Thank you for covering that. So.
Okay, let me see. As you're putting it out there, give me.
Well, now see, there's another typo. Don't click on the link. Just remove the double N there. My bad. Sorry. I told you I can't type. I'm a host. Okay. Okay, so Rabbi, comment on this. Apostle Paul is against food sacrifice to pagan idols. Is food sacrifice nothing? Is it in Judaism? So, like Paul mentioned, like he offered contradictory terms and conversations regarding food sacrifices to idols.
Not sure of the question.
Okay, so go scroll down to the very bottom and go about like 10 or 12 comments and look for Apostle Paul. That won't give you the context, but okay. So while you're looking for this, I'll comment for you what I know. So there's tons of things in the New Testament where it seems like Paul and others actually made it look like eating unkosher food is actually okay, but it's actually the Messianic viewpoint on that is, to me, is more clear. So the idea of food sacrifice to pagan idols is food sacrifice to nothing. That's a Pauline thing. I mean, because there's a huge thing in Judaism where you can't partake in something that you know for a fact is actually dedicated to idolatry. You can't be a part of that. So.
Yeah, that's true. You're not allowed to eat anything that's been sacrificed to idols. That's true.
Right.
I'm not quite sure of the question.
I'm trying to give you some context, but I'm not being lucky yet.
Yeah. Again, it's like this. I'm more interested in teaching what the truth is and not, dealing with every single little stupid thing in the New Testament that's not true.
Right.
That's not really important. The important thing is to recognize that basically it's not true. We went to the New Testament itself, the canon, everything like that, which indicates it. And all these things I'm doing now is to say, listen, this book is not from God. And what Paul writes is Paul's opinion. That's fine. Everybody, it's a free country. Everybody's right to an opinion. But, it's what God says we're supposed to do is what's really important.
At Jib, that's one of my favorites right there. Acts 1:12 mentions the Sabbath day's journey. There's a lot of people who are hating on the oral law. You cannot find the Sabbath day's journey anywhere in Tanakh. Likewise, you cannot.
No, actually, there's nowhere talked about it. We only know that from the oral law.
Right.
In fact, one of the reasons why I contend that the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls were not that big opponents of the rabbis was because they also fundamentally had the same concepts that we consider what we refer to as our oral law. The Shabbos day version, Sabbath day, how far you can travel on a Sabbath day. They had their own also.
That's funny.
They differ in law,
right?
What they held, but it's not that they didn't come from the same thing. I mean, in the Talmud we have disagreements about things also, but fundamentally they agree as to the principles underneath it. And if you look in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you find that there's a lot of cases where they're clearly dealing with principles that agrees with what the Pharisees and our rabbis say. They came from the same principles, and they're principles that are not explicitly in the Torah.
Right. So Apostle Paul said the point is that idolatry, an idol, is nothing. See, that's the problem with the New Testament, because they want to make everything acceptable. But with Hashem, idolatry is like mucho no bueno. Right. So Apostle Paul. So if you really want to find the heart of God, you really have to find out you have to understand what is wrong with idolatry. Idolatry is adultery. So with yourself, you would never, if you're married to a woman, you would never accept adultery as a path for your wife. So idolatry is the same thing with Hashem. So you're saying the point with the New Testament, I'm saying that because your name is Apostle Paul, of course. The point is that an idol is nothing. So what if you went home and told your wife, she meant nothing to me? What would your wife say? She would call you a nutcase. Dude, Apostle Paul, thank you for tuning in. I want you to stay here. You have a lot to learn, and you're in the right place for it, because you're not going to get this in the church. I'm just saying.
Yeah, by the way, William.
Yes, sir.
If Paul says idol worship is nothing, he's contradicting the Torah, because the Torah is quite clear. The biggest thing in the Torah is actually idol worship.
Talk to us. You've got time. Take as much time as you want. Go for it.
No, I mean, if you look out throughout the historical works, I mean, for example, exile comes in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where it tells us the curses. The curses come about because of what? Worshipping idols.
Right.
Specifically. If you go throughout the historical books, Kings and, for example, Chronicles, the big sin, the number one thing that's going on is lack of faith in Hashem and turning to the gods of other nations around them.
Right.
The prophets talk about that constantly, not only talking about the ideas of morality, for example, but idol worship and following in the ways of those nations around them. So, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, idols are nothing. They're just, dolls. There's no reality to them. But the worship of that nothing is very big to Hashem. It's the big thing that people are castigated from is because of that. Turning away from Hashem and turning to other idols. We should probably talk sometime about the idea. Most people don't understand what polytheism, paganism is like. It's when they worshipped the other idols, it wasn't that they weren't worshiping the God of Israel at the same time. They were worshiping the God of Israel, and they were also the God of Syria, and also the God of Babylon. They were worshiping other gods at the same time, all together. They were very ecumenical. Okay, that's what polytheism, that's what paganism is. It's ecumenical. Yeah, it's okay for you to worship your God, but you have to worship the other gods also. Hashem in the Torah says no. There's no other God supposed to be worshipped.
Okay, so
there are nothing for Hashem, but it's still you're not allowed to worship even though they're nothing.
Okay, so real quickly, this I just spotted this on the side. So Yohanan says, pretty sure the one in the Talmud is the same JC, Jesus, or Yehoshua. Actually, it wouldn't be Jesus because it's more of a Greek thing, but as just the dates were confused. But so what I would like for you to comment on is the idea that the whole concept of, okay, so how many of you people watching tonight know like a Mary, right, in the Spanish world, and you only know one of them? That's probably not likely. Most people who are in this have Spanish communities, like 50 or 60 or maybe 150 people named Mary. So what I have heard, and Rabbi, this is what I want you to come on down, is how common is the name Yehoshua or Yesh, whatever derivation of Yeshu in the Talmud? Is that a common name? Why would somebody think, because they mentioned the name Yeshua, because Jesus wouldn't have been the name they used in the Talmud because they didn't use that terminology. But
people in the Talmud basically have either Hebrew names like Yehoshua,
right, like Joshua, right,
is a name.
Right.
They have simple Hebrew names like that, or there's a few Greek names. Alexander is mentioned there in the Talmud. There's a few Greek names that come up, but that's basically it. I've never seen that. I haven't seen Yeshua, and that name I haven't seen.
Is Yehoshua in the Judaism world similar to the concept of like I mentioned Mary or like Juan in Spanish? Like I know, like
no, it's just a name.
It's a name that's very common. So, what are the chances that the
common?
Yes.
Moshe is much more common than Yehoshua.
but is
and David is, I think, Avram is also
Okay.
I mean, it's a common name. It's probably in the top 10, but it's not in the top 3.
Okay, cool.
I don't have any grandchildren named Yehoshua. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
it's not, it doesn't make me top 10.
So, wow, man, we have a lot to talk about.
Okay, anyways, it's talking getting late.
Yes,
and
it
we're
is. Yes,
veering
I
off from our
apologize.
subject.
I'm
People are
sorry.
going to listen to this later on and wonder what's going on here. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
I'm very sorry for keeping you so long, but usually I cut you off. Tonight I was like, I'm like, you know what? I cut him off so soon. I wanted him to stick around for a while tonight. So,
well, you know what? I got an idea for William. Next week, come in with a bunch of questions you want.
Okay.
And I'll take questions from you too.
So, point being made. Next week, there's not going to be a title for the show. It's going to be a Counter Missionary Q&A. Right? So if you have questions...
It's called Put the Rabbi on the Spot. Ask whatever questions you want.
Yeah. So next week might be fun for you guys. So if you guys watching tonight want to actually call in or send me an email to knocktalkquestions@gmail.com or contact Rabbi at questions at
if you
Judaism.
contact me, it'll be easier because I can have available to me actually forum. I don't, books or whatever I need. I don't think you want me to keep jumping up and down and pulling something off my shelf and reading from the thing itself. So
right. So
that's why.
Oh yeah.
As you notice, when I come here, I have the books that I'm going to reference here already.
Yes, Judaism'sAnswer.com. Is it questions at?
No, just outreach.
Okay, so I'm gonna put this on screen. Hang on a second. So what I have right now is Judaism'sAnswer.com is your website. So what is your
from my website? You can send an email. Also, there's an email address.
Contact. Yeah, just go to this right here and reach out to the contact us page.
I think on the bottom of the first page you'll find it.
Yes.
I have somebody who's actually volunteered to fix my page up.
Good.
And I'm hoping to speak with him this week, and maybe hopefully within the next month or two, my website will be upgraded so that it'll point to my lectures that I'm giving with you, the things that I have in my own thing.
Very good.
And a whole bunch of other stuff so that it'll be updated.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to next week myself because this will be the first full show in a year almost that.
Yeah, for a while we haven't done that.
We've never really done a full Q&A. Just you call in and ask the rabbi questions.
We have. First of all, when I was in Israel with Tovia, we took 2 days. We were set together, so that's.
Oh, but that was like a joint show, though.
Yeah. But I have it 1 or 2 by myself. But we'll do some. We'll do it next week, maybe for 2 weeks. Maybe I'll just do the whole holidays and start Isaiah 50 after that. I have to really see like that.
Now, as the show host, I must overrule. If you guys have so many questions, we might do more than 1 or 2 weeks. We might just make this a regular thing.
No, I got to go back to this. There are things that people have asked me to do.
Yeah, I know. So, I'm just saying.
Some of these are in response for things that I have to do.
Right.
That people want. Isaiah 52 was specifically asked for me to do it.
Yep.
For some people, so I want to do it. It is important. Isaiah 53 is discussed a lot of times.
For sure.
So I want to give an in-depth approach to it, and so it can be out there now. Remember, once we do things together, it's out there.
Yes, sir.
And once it's out there, it's like YouTube is forever. What can I tell you?
Yes, indeed. And Rabbi, you have clearly made yourself a presence here in this whole world of the counter missionary, and there's so many people that I know. Every week look forward to your show because you have so much intellect and so much knowledge to share with people. And
each of us has a different style and each of us has a different strength.
Sure.
And we do different things. I mean, Tovia and I, we go back for years and years.
Yes.
That's why when Israel, the two of us sit together.
But not to take away from that, but you yourself have you have so much to give, and you've been giving so long for over a year now, and people really respect you, and I really look forward to their interaction with you, especially on the next few weeks, because we're going to do a Q&A for you, and so you guys can call in and do your thing and talk to him directly. We'll keep you on the phone. We won't cut you off. You can dialogue back and forth, and I'll kind of mute my mic, and you guys can do your thing. So, Rabbi.
And again, written questions beforehand are always easier because it gives me a chance to, get a few more things a little bit deeper into a subject rather than just giving a simple answer.
Right. Very good.
Because many questions, one of the biggest problems, of course, is in this area is that people who grow up Christians or live in a Christian society like we do, there's certain things, philosophically, they refer to your background. It's things you sort of take for granted. You think you know things because you sort of take it for granted because that's where, and in a way, the Tanakh is so foreign to what most people are raised in that they don't really see what it's about because they're wearing glasses that are shaded from what they've been raised up to. And you have to like take them off and go back and look at it again from a different point of view and see, oh, 1 second, that's
right.
I'll tell you, when I do Isaiah 53, there's a lot of that's going to go on. That's one of the main points about it, is that people who look at it, who are Christians or became Christians at one time in their life, maybe because of their backgrounds, they don't even see what's in front of their eyes. They're not even able to read it.
Let's just say that you're going to develop a lot of new enemies you never knew you had.
No, I don't.
No.
I have a lot of people praying for me, so that's nice.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. Look, everybody send me. I get messages every week. Like, look, during a show with Rabbi Singer, for example, I get comments I have to like filter because it's like Rabbi Singer's like a satanic pig from what? I'm like, really, guys. Just because you don't agree with them, you don't have to call them names. So be prepared. I'm just saying.
Apostle Paul. Can I just make one comment about Apostle Paul?
Absolutely.
Counter missionaries, primarily those of us who are counter missionaries, especially Jewish people like me, Tovia. Our main interest is basically, if you Christians would leave us alone, we probably would go out of business. I mean, that's basically it. Just leave us alone.
Right. True.
I only got involved with this because Christians wouldn't leave me alone. I live in a ghetto here, Jewish ghetto, and they don't leave us alone.
That's funny.
So that's what started me to get on. One day I'll tell you the story, but it's like, leave us alone. That's all. That's all. We just want to be left alone. You leave us alone, and you won't have any.
Yep.
William will have a problem finding people to go on the show because they have nothing to. They're not interested in talking about it.
Yep. Very true. Very true.
Just leave us alone.
Well, Rabbi, great show tonight. Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Yes, sir. We'll look forward
It's
to
a
seeing
little
you.
bit long tonight, but that's
yeah. Please give your wife my. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep you so long. I didn't want to let you go so soon, though. So.
Well, don't worry. My bill to you is going to increase by a little bit.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I see how much money I raised for you. I should at least get a percentage of
it. You certainly will, my friend. Thank you so much. All right, you guys have a great night. We'll see you next time. Same time, same place. Peace out, everybody.
Okay.
Later, Rabbi. Shavua Tov. Bye. Thanks.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה